I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Atanawandaran, and the Wendat people. I feel a bit sensitive about that today. And I want to say thanks. So I'm going to kind of ad-lib the early part of this presentation because it has to do with my past, which seems like something I should know fairly well. And then since you have seen, some of you have seen the exhibition, I'll make a more formal presentation about that work and talk to it a bit more in the second half. But I just wanted to talk to you earlier. As you are artists, or young curators, administrators, whatever your ambition may be, I would like to talk to you as a practitioner and talk to you a little bit about my early days and what it was like to be your age way back when. You're going to hear a lot about Vancouver tonight, unfortunately, because I spent many of my years there and have kind of an attachment to the photography culture that exists there. So, as an undergrad, I went to Vancouver from Alberta to study at Emily Carr College of Art and Design, as it was known in those days. And initially, I really wanted to be a commercial photographer. I wanted to be somebody who was working in the industry, and I really wanted to do photography, whatever kind of photography that might come around. I could have been a photojournalist. I had those kind of ambitions. But then I landed to Emily Carr, and I went to the mandatory art history class, which at that time was taught by Professor Ian Wallace, who was not yet known as the person he is known now. He's known in Vancouver as the grandfather of conceptual art at this point in Vancouver. But then he was just Professor Wallace. But he was an excellent art history teacher, and he really kind of introduced me to a way of thinking about art that was more evaluative, it was more expansive, it was more involved, it was more politically and socially engaged. And whenever he talked about a certain kind of period, like Renaissance or contemporary or even medieval, or even, it was even, like rock paintings. And he did so in a way that really opened out a whole world of ideas that I had never really kind of been exposed to before. And in high school, art was really a craft, and you learned to do this craft, and that was about it. So in Vancouver was when I was first introduced to the kind of intellectual, I guess you would say maybe even intellectual atmosphere of art. And I really, really took to this. And so I got swept up in it, and then my ambition kind of shifted at that point, and I began to be more interested in art and not so much in commercial photography, commercial photography. So that is to say, I kind of got swept up in this conceptualism. And so as a photographer, I was trying to find my way into what this was. And I think my early undergrad work was all terrible. It was just not even worth showing. But it took me many, many years to kind of get to the point where I was happy with what I was doing. And that was the point where I discovered garbage as a subject matter. So that probably seems a bit weird. But for the period of time that I'm talking about, I was interested in photography has many kind of sides to it, and I became really interested in the means of production in photography, and I was thinking a lot about the negative and what the negative means. And then I took it further, and I was thinking about negativity and negative dialectics, and that's a whole other thing, which is maybe not that important anywhere now, but I was thinking about what would be a really negative subject matter that I could photograph that would cause a kind of reaction in people. I was looking for the most negative kind of thing that I could put there that would make people think about photography and negative aspects in a different kind of way. So I landed on this kind of idea of garbage. And not only that, garbage really bothered me as a kind of person in the world. I used to kind of just look at the garbage that I would be throwing out, and there would be this horrible mix of old spaghetti and paper, and I just thought, I don't understand this material conglomeration. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me. I had a kind of an ecological reaction to it, and that there was material that could be used, could be recycled, something could come of it. And then there was the biological, where you would have something that you could, compost or do something with. But it was just a big, giant mess. And it became, for me, garbage just became a metaphor of the kind of world that I was entering into. Or it just became like, just the material substrate of everything that had gone wrong. So I really, really got interested in it, both as an ethical project and as a conceptual project, as an intellectual project. And so that's why I was into garbage. And still, I get challenged about this quite a bit, and I have many responses that I can talk about, but I'm still quite attached to this project, and I think it's kind of a lifelong project. So these are some of the first works that I did in studio. Again, they're kind of intellectualized in a way, sort of removed from the social context. But that was sort of where I was at. Vancouver has a culture where there's a lot of photographers who are very well known, doing many, many things, and I was trying to find a way that I could kind of fit in, and there wasn't anybody doing this kind of crazy thing, and so somehow I thought it was a good idea. So I have a series of, I think it's about 10 different garbage bags. Again, they take on the aspects of a quotidian sort of lump that you would accumulate in a week or something like that. They all have a kind of personality, a different sort of sense to them, but the blackness sort of prevents you from knowing what's really going on inside. And so the contrast of the black and the white, the good and the bad, really interested in me. And also this kind of convention of having the black bag shrouding what's inside, also interested in me. I thought this really speaks to the way that our culture really can't handle this issue. It wants to kind of remove it. It wants to negative it. It wants to get it out of sight, remove it from the kind of apprehension that you get with sight. So it's completely shrouded. It's a mystery, and I just kind of got into it in that sense. And so I did a number of them, and they seem to be really popular in Switzerland. I don't know how the Swiss really bought these works, but not the Canadians. And I did some very, very large. So these are all kind of actual scales, so they duplicate the actual scale of the garbage bag as you would see it if you were kind of seeing it with your natural vision. And they're kind of untitled, but I think they're all fine. Sometimes you can see there's hard things in there, there's soft things at the bottom, or whatever, But you can never be sure what's inside, and I think that was what was really of interest to me, that pure abstraction of the black and white and the subject matter, the way it worked together was really exciting for me. And okay, so I did those, but I'm still wanting to kind of be a regular photographer working on photographing life and other kinds of things. So I'm also kind of going out into the street. And I made a number of these as well, which are more like typological studies. So I would look to see what kind of piles of garbage there were, and then I would get back and sort and accumulate and compile the kinds of types that I would see. So this is almost like an anthropological study of what's out there. And I went about it pseudo-scientifically, not with an absolute rigor, but some things like this, these yellow bags, I'll put them all together. I don't know what it means. But I brought them together almost as as a kind of study of a streetscape or something like that. So these were all shot in Toronto, and I was there for a brief period doing some work as a contract teacher at U of T. And so what I liked about, these are from Chinatown, and what I liked about Chinatown is the garbage goes up at night, almost like a wall, and then it gets taken away and goes down in the morning. So I liked these kind of walls, and I photographed them. Miscellaneous is just what it is. This one's called Miscellaneous. It's just like whatever. You kind of see this kind of thing in London a little bit more than you do in other places, because this is a kind of pass-through sort of city. You see lots of strange furniture, the ubiquitous flat white plastic lawn chair, other strange things. This one's called white garbage because the garbage that gets put in the clear bags in Toronto is actually recycling. So what's interesting about the way that this looks is that it's most of the stuff that's in the bags is white, and so it's the good, and then there's the bad in the black bags. They're all kind of corny juxtapositions, but I enjoyed doing them anyway. So you can see the shredded paper and other kinds of recycling paper as the good. Here's the bad. This is like a black tie party, like a formal party somewhere. Yeah. And these, these are maybe 6 by 4 feet, 6 by 7 feet. They're not actual scale, they're a little bit smaller. But they're more like studies. And this one's called fast food. And this is the one that's probably the most repulsive, but it's actually good garbage because a lot of this is, well, supposedly goes to recycling, but there's a lot of McDonald's clown faces and everything, so it's really the scariest one of all. Right. Okay. And now I'm going to talk about the Continuous Garbage Project a little bit, if I can. I was trying to think about ways I can really expand on the study of garbage and what I could really do. And I began to think about, I was thinking about garbage constantly, and constantly thinking about what's going on and how can I better serve this subject, what can I do as a photographer, what's happening. And I was also trying to, in my personal life, kind of reduce my garbage because I found it really, really repulsive. And I felt wasteful. And this was a big problem for me. I was an artist, and that stuff that people say about the starving artist, the bohemian artist, not making a lot of money, it's all true. And it was certainly true in my case. And so the thought of wasting something or wasting anything was a difficult kind of dilemma or ethical dilemma for me. And I didn't like what I was being forced to do in my culture. So I was looking at my garbage one day, and this is the funny part, and I realized as an artist, I probably produced more garbage than I did art in terms of my material production. And then my heart just sank. I just felt even worse than I did before. And so I said to myself, I've got to do something about changing the situation because I'm the problem that I don't like, and so on and so on. So I became the change I wanted to see, and I started to reduce my garbage. But in addition to that, I documented everything I wasted for a period of 5 years. Now, I'm not talking about recycling. I did a lot of that. But there was, I just kind of set myself this goal that I'm just going to document my waste. I'm going to do it for a 5-year period, and I'm going to see what I find out about myself and about what's happening in Vancouver, where I was living. So I didn't know how many photographs this would be. I kind of said, when a bag is full, I'm going to document it and put it out. And so The other thing I guess I would need to say is that I decided to go for 5 years because I didn't think I would learn enough in 1 year, and I didn't think I could go for 10 years. So I compromised at 5 years, and I gave myself 5 years to accomplish something. And the thing that was, I'll tell you about the difficulties about it later, but I can honestly say during this period of the garbage project, I didn't waste anything. So what I lost in terms of garbage, I gained in art. And that somehow was kind of a redemptive aspect of what I did. So I feel like I learned something, and I also left something in the historical record that I think has meaning, but who knows, time will tell. So I just started going, and it's a continuous line, a historical record of these kind of bags. What you're seeing here was an installation at the power plant. This is years 3 and 4 on some opposing walls together. So some years were better than other years, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I got better as time went on. When your life goes kind of out of control, you can kind of I generally found that you produce more garbage. And if you have to travel around for work, if you have to do this, or if you have to do that, if you're moving around and doing other things, you can't tightly control your life in the way that you want to. And so those were the years 3 and 4, where everything just kind of got out of control. This garbage project spans 1998 till 2003, so it really is a millennial project. And that, I think, is exciting for me. It kind of spans the years, I think, of significant change. And also, all this work was produced analog, that is, in studio with their cameras and negatives, and their prints produced in a darkroom. And there was also a sense that I had that this work, the negative was going out. It's the garbage with all this as well. So there were some inside jokes built into the project, like that. So this was another installation where you're seeing, it's a kind of modular design where I've installed it different ways, different times. And it actually became a little bit popular, more popular than some of my other artworks have been. And that in the middle of the project, say year 2002, 2003, I was invited to show in Switzerland, for example, where they found it very fascinating. And so the places where I went as an artist became inscribed into the project as well. You can see that it shifts to their Swiss names and Swiss signifiers and other kinds of things. So it's a diary, a negative diary in a sense. You can't really tell much about myself, but you can see something of a pattern of consumption. And that's all. Are there any questions? I'm just kind of rambling on. If you want to ask a question and interrupt, I don't mind at all. So I think this is the one where I can see the detail. You can see kind of from the bags that I'm using, where I'm going, what I'm doing, the places that I'm shopping somewhat, and sometimes you can see through and sometimes you can't, and you can see how much liquor I'm drinking and all kinds of things. So there's an endless supply of details that you can kind of glean from this work, and sometimes I don't even want to reveal all the stuff that's there. So I'll just leave it at that. But this work actually did a lot better. I didn't think anybody would be interested in this work at all, and I thought it would just sit in my basement for years. But people became a little bit interested in it when they found out that I was doing it for so long. My commitment seemed to mean something to people, and they started taking it seriously because I was taking it seriously. And so I recommend being serious sometimes. What was I going to say? So yes, this work became slightly successful, and the funniest thing, I was working with an art dealer at the time, Katrina Jeffries in Vancouver, and she was good at promoting the work, but I think also the work was unusual enough that it's kind of stood out from other kinds of things. And I had a reputation because I did sell this work. So in a sense, I am the lady who sold my garbage for a lot of money to the National Gallery and to the Art Gallery of Ontario. And I can always be kind of pleased about being able to accomplish that. And I sold it for a lot more than it cost to make. So that was great. And a Swiss collector bought it as well. So this was a very, all of this aspects of the kind of institutional critique that comes with, selling something that is so-called garbage, but it's not garbage, within the culture of fine art. This was all very interesting to me. Yes, I see a hand.
Is it acquired by year or?
Yes,
by?
I sold it by year. Yeah, you had to take it all by year. I didn't think anyone was prepared to take the whole thing. It's still for sale if you know anybody who wants 5 years of my garbage. I only made it in an edition of 2, and the one edition that I sold by year, that's gone. And yeah.
How many pieces would be in 1 year?
I started off using about 1 bag about a week. So I think my first year was about 58 or something like that, 58 individual photos. So that's 58 full bags of garbage, which is, I have to say, about half of what a normal person would produce. A normal single person. Now, if you were a mother or a father, you would be double of that. Because when you have kids, you generate a mountain of garbage, usually. And so I managed to kind of reduce it in the second year, something like 50, but that was tough. The third year, my life kind of exploded and became out of control, so those are all kind of ballooned up in the year 2000. And then in my last year, I was able to get it down to 27. So I got somewhere, but it took a long time. But I'm from Vancouver, and so I compare myself to somebody, an exemplary person like David Suzuki, who puts out 1 bag of garbage every year. I just couldn't get to that kind of place because he has a garden and he recycles and he does all this kind of thing. I was just a schlep in an apartment. I had some restrictions on how far I could go with it, but I really did everything. I reduced everything. I wouldn't buy a bar of soap unless it was in a piece of paper. I was just doing as best that I could, but there were times, when you have to get to work and you're hungry and you just, I couldn't be the person I wanted to be because my culture wouldn't allow it in a way. So that's my kind of background and where I kind of, yeah.
Sorry. So does that mean that when you were out and about during the day, you bring your garbage home with you and put it in the bag?
Yeah, if I got takeout. Yeah. And lots of the times, like I knew all the places to hit. They would only wrap in paper, so I had a lot of falafel.
You need to have a bag with you for your garbage.
Yeah, like these ones here, all those takeout containers, yeah, I would take them home. And then I would use them again. I would try to make something out of what I had. I really believe that I should be able to make something out of this material and that it shouldn't be wasted. It had something that I could do with it. My great-grandmother was that way. She was wild about recycling, and she was a kind of Depression-era baby in a way, but she really was careful. I think she was that way anyways. The rest of my family, no, they're not like that. So I think I was the first kind of ecologically conscious person in my family. But I would try everything, and even sitting down. I don't know if this is even more ecologically conscious, like sitting and eating in, and so it goes to the dishwasher. I don't know if that's any more or less ecologically conscious. But it was the material thing that used to make me feel guilty and bad, because it goes to the landfill. So I just thought, this is terrible. I'm an artist. I can't do this, Yeah.
Any food waste that you had, were you composting at the time, or were you putting it in the garbage also?
Sometimes I would put it, I lived for a time in a co-op building in Vancouver that had a worm composter on the ceiling. And so that was good, and I would put it up there. But then the worms got loose onto the roof, and there was a thing. And also, I didn't live there. I moved. I couldn't live there because it was getting too expensive even to live in a co-op. And so, I lived in just an apartment, and so I couldn't. And we didn't have things like the place where you put the food waste and then the grease, as they do in Europe or other kinds of places. I mean, when I showed this work in Europe, they were just aghast at how much we were wasting, because they have, well, it's a smaller kind of national organizational system for a lot of this garbage, but they also come from some kind of traditions that we would never do this. This was like a picture of the wild, wild west, where it's just kind of like throwing it out the window, practically. And so I think I could have done a lot more. It's just that I wasn't in a position to have all the things that I needed as a person who lives in a kind of one-bedroom apartment. I mean, how am I going to have a worm composter? Put your hand up if you've got a worm composter in your one-bedroom apartment. Yes, that's cool. I would have liked to have done a lot, but even 10 years ago, the ecological consciousness wasn't really as sophisticated as it is now. I think your generation is a little bit further ahead that way. So, okay. The Prince of Denmark came to see this show at the power plant. He said, "Ooh, that's a lot of garbage." You know how they have to speak when you're royal? You just kind of say these innocuous things all the time. Anyway, I mean, I have an endless series of jokes because people would ask me these things, and there was always a joke waiting there to be told because it was garbage for sale. For example, I have one of the black bags that I did at a really large scale, and you'll like this. I just kind of overdid it. It's a big monumental piece of garbage, and you're at the scale where you feel like you're just going to step into it. So a hotshot lawyer firm bought this from my dealer in Toronto. Garbage in, garbage out was what they thought was so funny. Anyway, the first time I showed this work in a gallery, a lady came up to me and she said, "Where did you get a garbage bag that large?" she thought it was a picture of a really, really big garbage bag, which I was so thrilled to hear because I thought, she thinks this is something that can happen, that's really real. That is the threat that I wanted her to think it was. And so, I just have tons of stories like that. But we haven't got all night. I actually want to make this, lecture a little bit shorter than you're used to.
Did you explain it to her, or did you just like Walgreens?
I made a joke. I said, well, garbage is a big problem. And then I laughed, and she was laughing, and so I just let it go at that. And I don't know. Maybe it was a nervous question. Sometimes at a gallery, people ask you nervous questions, and it seems really odd. But you'll find out when you have your own shows. Strange things kind of come up. So I'm about to get to the other works, but before I leave this site, I'm going to just show you, I'm doing these kind of collages, more internet-based art where I'm accumulating images of well-known kind of garbage disasters around the world and kind of making these abstract and not abstract collages with them. And so that's what I'm kind of doing now in my spare time. It's a kind of meditative subject for me. So now I want to get to the carts. So, I'm going to read now something a little bit more formal. There's not as many jokes in this section of the presentation. Oops. Does this have an auto thing that might be going? Yes, it is. Maybe I'll just, it's going too fast. Yes, good. Thank you. So you can see, I hope, like, should I just let it go? It'll go around. You can see the connection between the garbage as a subject and this kind of street version where I'm photographing these carts. And, you know, I'm really interested in kind of the last moment of use value for an object, for some material before it becomes landfill. And this is another incidence of that. But this particular subject has many other things that are involved in it. And it's not just garbage as a subject, it's something a lot more. And so I'm really kind of attached to this work. And this is a memoir I wrote. It's part of the book, and I think it introduces the work quite well. So this is called The Vancouver Carts, a Brief Memoir. I began to photograph this series of repurposed shopping carts in Vancouver in 2004 and 5. So this is right after the garbage project ended. I started doing these works. Vancouver was my home then, and I'd been living there since 1981. I long witnessed the rising flow of trans-Pacific capital and investment that had turned Vancouver into a global real estate market beyond the reach of most locals, certainly beyond the reach of most of the artists and writers that I knew. By the time the millennium came around, it was getting difficult to be an emerging artist in a city that had been steadily gentrifying since Expo 86. That's the International Expo. By 2005, I was in a bad way, and that means I was really broke, which wasn't unusual as far as artists' lives go, and I was willing to roll with it. I began to see that I might not be able to ride out the social and economic changes that would continue to unfold in Vancouver, as I had done in the past. It was then that I got a job offer from Western University, and it was an offer, it has to be said, that was too good to refuse for somebody like me. And so I opted for a change of location and life in order to survive as an artist and hold my business east. Leaving behind Vancouver and those photographs was a personal tragedy for me. It was and will remain more of a crisis than I can describe here, though it might appear that because I lost my home, homelessness became my cause. In fact, these images foretold the future and preceded my exile by at least a year. So I started doing these photographs before all the Western kind of stuff happened, and so in a way, it's very strange. Anyway, it seems appropriate to say in retrospect that an unconscious force structured this work from within and from without at once. For in them I seem to have produced my exile as an art premonition, and that dreamt itself into being. Thus I was never more invested in these photos than when my exile began, and when my ability to produce the imagery had been not taken away, but certainly diminished. So I really wanted to do this work in Vancouver, but the move to Western was just something that I had to do. I couldn't stay in Vancouver and do the work because I couldn't afford to be there, and I couldn't do the work I wanted to do in Vancouver because my job was somewhere else. This is what can happen to you. So I had to content myself with summer returns to continue to photograph the series, and so I took up the work again in fits and starts over the next several years, mostly in 2010 and 2011. The project became attenuated, but this allowed for a long-term study of the visible changes that came with the era of the people without homes and the homes without people. That was so much a feature of Vancouver's urban evolution at the end of the century. I was motivated, in a sense, to photograph this cart culture as much as other photographers were motivated to photograph oil refineries in the era of oil. So I did think that this particular moment in time in our culture in Canada, homes, I think, is a really serious and strange kind of issue that a lot of us aren't thinking carefully enough about, I believe. Documenting at least some of this cart culture over a long period of time revealed an interesting feature of the carts themselves. Early on in the project, I noticed that many of the carts I was seeing were filled with personal possessions, blankets, tarps, coffee mugs, clothes, Tupperware, even little items of personal pleasure and totem like plush toys. I don't know if I've got one here. Okay, we'll see them later. Later images, however, show more of a cart kit. The poles, the diggers, the boxes, the bags needed for scavenging, and not a home wagon per se. So over the course of the years that I've documented these things, I started to see less and less in the cart and more of a kind of a toolkit sort of emerge. Whereas before, people were actually using this to almost like a wagon, a living kind of like gypsy wagon or something. So that was interesting to me. Had the homeless who had constructed the earlier carts been flushed out slowly but assuredly, replaced by individual gleaners supplementing their income in the invisible economy with daily bottle collecting and street vending of the last-ditch use before the landfill items. On occasion, I encountered some of the cart owners on my photo walks. But at least half of the time, I only saw the cart. In fact, it was the isolated, abandoned cart full of stuff that first caught my attention and began the whole series in 2004. It surprised me that it was just there for hours on its own in the middle of the street, and suddenly I began to notice them a little bit more here and there. There's lots of people who see carts, see them, but there's not many people who kind of notice or really kind of take in that information. It's just kind of passed over. Once you start looking, you'll see them a little bit more. So I began finding them stashed here and there, half hidden or half protected in the open street where people know what's what. These carts were territories within worlds, wheels within wheels, and I had to know and remain aware of that obscurity. I walk the city nearly every day on my summer photo shoots. Vancouver has the kind of climate that facilitates photography. It's no coincidence, I think, that photography developed in Vancouver. The weather's mild, and the temperature rarely drops below zero. And so, unlike in other parts of Canada, snow is not an aesthetic or an allegorical problem. You know, snow makes everything look like a Christmas card, so it really affects photography in a very negative way. It kind of, everything gets covered with a whiteness that makes everything look good and nice and clean, except for the dirty snow, but it's an allegorical problem anyway. In Vancouver, the sky is generally overcast, which is like putting a softbox over a whole city. So the diffuse light is perfect for photography, and this is kind of a rare but constant feature of photography. Though no discussion of the so-called Vancouver School, and I don't know if you know about the Vancouver School, but it's a well-known school of photography with an international reputation. No one's ever made this point that Vancouver itself has something to do with photography being important and emerging from this city, but I'm telling you now here that was the case. Yeah, I want to stress how wonderful it is to photograph in this city, in the city of Vancouver. It has also been said that Vancouver possesses a generic nowhere but anywhere quality that epitomizes an internationalism used for the related art of the film industry. But this is something I never experienced in practice. Vancouver has a distinctive and idiosyncratic kind of light quality. So I don't know if you've ever seen, what's that film that was always Vancouver, the spooky one? X-Files. The light quality of X-Files is the Vancouver kind of quality. Thank you. It's a very, very interesting quality. Just like Venice has this particular light quality, Vancouver has one as well. So this is summer, it doesn't look anywhere. Yeah, the dimness of a West Coast rainforest is like nothing else. The same mildness that makes the city a photographer's paradise also allows for the cult culture I came to document. These singularities of climate and gentrification are emphatically linked. So that mild climate also makes for a more highly developed homeless and street culture than you would see anywhere else in Canada, because it's just basically warmer and easier to be out. Citizenship rights and civic space would become two opposing dialogues about common ground, but without a certain legal common ground. And so I was intensely focused on this as a political issue, a visual conundrum, and a challenge, because politics, so fugitive and invisible, has to be seen to be believed. The combination of force and consent that make homeless people visible and at the same time denies their existence is both hard to prove and hard to picture. And that's one thing that was difficult for me. And maybe we can talk about some of those dilemmas if you have questions, but people always ask me, where are the people? But, I made a decision about that. In the summer of 2011, there occurred what was categorized in the press as a micro-house demolition. Photographic evidence emerged of members of the city engineering department throwing a homeless cart into a dumpster. This was in the press, like the Vancouver Sun. This was just one example of many such incidents that had peaked perhaps during 2009 in the lead up to the Winter Olympics of 2010 in Vancouver. But it launched an interesting political controversy about ownership and property. Vancouver prohibits the demolition of homeless persons' property under the abandoned property policy, but police officers and others regularly violate this rule. That was what was documented, was a violation of that rule. At the same time, Vancouver has a revitalization strategy, primarily targeted for the downtown east side, where the homelessness is a little bit more overt. And that time saw the criminalization of poverty and sweeping evictions from the single-room occupancy apartments and hotels. These actions cannot be considered in isolation. So interesting dilemmas emerged for me. Can you only have property if you already have property, that is a home? Can you only have property rights as a person, as an individual, if you have a place to put them? And that was essentially the case. So unless you had a place to put your stuff, you couldn't own any stuff. You would have basically have your stuff. You couldn't leave your stuff. You had to either carry it or whatever. Homelessness became a focal point in a city that was rapidly gentrifying, and the carts of the homeless became lightning rods for all that had gone wrong in certain parts of town. And this is why I photographed them. They were profoundly emblematic of all these features. I never moved or arranged anyone's stuff. I shot them just where I found them, and so these are all on location. They are what they are. Here's the one with the little plush toy. Most of the people that I encountered and spoke to weren't all homeless per se. most of them were supplementing their social assistance income and making a go of it on their own in the underground economy. Most of these people worked a lot. A fellow told me he could make about $40 a day for 4 hours work. He worked when he wanted, how he wanted, and he did it by choice. And I had to kind of pause and kind of calculate those numbers. I had to think about that because after I paid my taxes and things like that, that was nearly the return that I was making on my day job. I worked 8 hours, but he was working 4 and making about that in terms of take home. So I thought, maybe I could do this and it would be okay. Because I felt really trapped with my day job, being taken away from art and doing all these other things, but he had made a decision to just forget about it and do his own thing, and he seemed to have the kind of freedom that I envied, and so it was really interesting to me to talk to him. The cards then are symbolic stand-ins for some of these politics. They're icons of labor, economies, mobility, commodity, relations, citizenship, property value, ethics, and homelessness, yes. They stand as conduits of property, even as their impermanence and mobility suggest they aren't property. This is one of the ways their value is occluded in the real politics of the civic space. They are impossible figurations, the homes of the homeless. To see and to photograph these manifestations is to give some permanence to their being in a world and to begin to address the unconscious hold they have on the forces of gentrification. The ways in which their very presence signals the inequalities of the gentrification deal. I photographed these cards because they were always moving, always changing, and thus some ongoing record of their existence seemed to me a very exciting and very important project to undertake. This isn't something that you can, this changes through time and moves through time. The cards aren't merely emblems of an underground economy, a subconscious figuration of some lack of inclusivity. They're a moving force and a symptom of the organic entanglement of city life. And I'm taking too long now. Somehow I went on making too many jokes. So I want to say that these cards are more than just what's overlooked in my culture. This type of concerned documentary or as works of art in themselves. I've had a difficult time getting Vancouver to look at them and to take them seriously. I had difficulty for about 2 years. I tried to get galleries to show this work, and I got kind of heavy rejections. And I think it has something to do with the link in Vancouver between the real estate developers, the heavy gentrification and the high cost of real estate there, and the galleries who are sponsored in almost exclusively by the real estate developers. So in Vancouver, the galleries have been kind of folded into the kind of gentrification package. And so to show this work would be to kind of undermine somebody's sponsor or donor relationship. And so they are here because James Patton saw the value in them, and I'm very happy to have them here. And I think it's actually historically interesting that this is happening here. This is the first time this work has been shown, and I think it fits into what I understand to be my project. So I'm very happy to have it here and to show it here, and I'm very happy to speak with you about any questions you might have about the work as such. And I'll just keep flying through. Yes, how?
I see you photographs actually, the project you showed us, and this one, devoid of human
Right.
people. I'm sure this is intentional, but
It is.
not regular.
So there wasn't any people before?
Yeah, neither here.
Neither there, no.
Yeah.
I think with these ones I made a kind of conscious choice because I didn't want a connection between the carts and an individual for some kind of legal reasons, or just kind of an association with something that has a kind of unclear legal status and an individual. So there was that I had to consider. But I also think there's a lot of personality implied, or it's kind of there in the cart, but it's not stated per se. It's not documented. So I don't know if that was entirely the right choice, but for me it felt like the right thing to do. And since my practice had been about material culture, I felt like it was somewhat of a continuity, and yet it seemed to be more human than the other things that I had done, definitely. I could easily be challenged about that, and I think that might be one of the weaknesses of the work. However, I feel like, I don't know if I could insert a kind of portraiture into there. The meaning and the interpretation kind of shifts, and I think it puts too much weight on the individual that's depicted, and it exposes them, and it's like exposing somebody, and I didn't really want that to be part of it. Yes.
Yes. So how did you think, I love these works, so how did you grapple with the aesthetics of doing, and they're ugly in themselves, and yet these are really beautiful photographs, and the lines and the colors and the lighting and the shadows and the way things are positioned, they're quite beautiful. And yet they're kind of ugly cards. So I just wondered how you thought you worked with that sort of juxtaposition of
Yeah. I think that's the other weakness of the work, and I can totally be called on it. And sometimes I worry when people say to me, as they have with this exhibition, "Oh, the work's so beautiful." I kind of think, is that good? I'm not really sure. I think that photography has a way, even if you don't, like I don't boost the color and do all these kinds of things to the photography, but it's just the process of documenting and taking it through the photographic medium. It cleans things up, and it takes away the smells. It takes away a lot of the kind of other sensorial aspects that you would apprehend when you were actually there. So it's really, really abstracted to the visual, and I think that I can't help myself when I'm trying to make an aesthetic arrangement with some of this stuff. However, I did try to make it the same each time so that I wasn't making a pretty picture out of everything, so that I was really, again, doing a typology where I would try to keep the focus on the cart and not about my composition per se, but I did work with what's there. That's definitely a weakness. It's a weakness, definitely. Well, it could be considered a weakness. It would be something that somebody could criticize, and I could only say the things that maybe I just said. And yeah, it's a classic. Oh God, I don't know where to go. I think I'm not sure your name, but then I'll try to come around. Thank you for these questions. It's wonderful.
Having moved from Vancouver to here, how do you think the work would differ thematically if you were to repeat it in London?
I looked for this kind of culture here, and there is a bit of it, but I couldn't do it. There just isn't enough of it to make a point. I think what I would be left with would be something that isn't emphatic enough, because I just wouldn't have enough of it. I mean, it was difficult to kind of say that's enough at 120 images. When I finished, I don't think I'm quite finished, but I said that's enough, I'm ready to show this work now. I've seen a few kinds of things. I tried to, for example, in London, photograph the kind of student garbage that goes out every May. End of May, there's quite a kind of street proliferation of stuff, and that seems to me to be really characteristic of London. But I never landed on a successful looking image, and I couldn't relate it to something that I thought was historically significant enough. So this place, this time, the expense of Vancouver, the real contrast between the high and the low economies was really, for me, bringing together a lot of my concerns in a way that I can't seem to get happening here. I'd love to. I really want to. If you have any ideas, talk to me later. I don't know. I'll go to James and then I'll try to go up there.
I was just going to mention that that quality of being seductive and beautiful and
Yeah.
aestheticized, I see it as a success of the work because it creates this uncanny relationship to subject matter, and it's something that
Yeah.
people like Ed Bertinsky
I've thought about for
yeah, because
decades.
it's so
Yeah.
beautiful, and then you realize you're looking at pollution or
Right.
factories, and
Yeah,
but that being drawn in, the seduction of the photographic image,
yeah.
makes it all that much more complex.
Yeah, I have to agree. I never criticized Ed Bertinsky for the beautiful image. I don't think it was something that I legitimately would want to launch at any other photographer. That seduction is kind of a way in, and not only that, it keeps you looking at the image, and anything that keeps you looking at the image is good, because we have a culture where we're just kind of like looking at stuff and taking it, moving on. And I think that long looking is something I'm really trying to encourage, and sometimes aesthetics or that thing is going to do that. I don't know other ways. There's just one way back there from the student.
When you did encounter like people who, like the cars belong to, they frequently tell you stories about like where the items came from or their lives, or did you get that personal view of?
I did. Only about half the time. First, they were mostly curious, like, why? What are you doing? What are you doing this for? And I told them that I was an artist right away, and I said that I'm a photographer and I'm interested in this as a kind of street phenomena, as a culture. And they said, oh yeah, what do you mean? And so I'd have to explain a little bit more. And they, for the most part, were interested in being known and heard, because I think they think of themselves as kind of invisible, or they're not used to being attended to. So they were kind of into it. They were saying, oh yeah, you can photograph my car, yeah, do it. And so I found them most interested, even at the intellectual level, where, because I was trying to show the way they live for this life in some ways, without compromising themselves. They were really cooperative. They kind of into it. I don't know. I'll go way to the back of Graham.
So your current work is in those digital collages, right?
Yeah.
Those, famous garbage places. Are you working in anything London-based?
No,
Not at all.
no. I think that I'm going to go do something in Toronto, but I'm keeping that a top secret artist, secret file for now. Judith, do you still have a question?
Well, I was just curious. I think that you never move these cards. That you find them.
Yeah, some of them are changed. This one's chained to the tree, for example.
Tree.
Yeah,
But
I don't need to move them. They're where they are. That's fine with me. Yeah.
it's not the case so much in this one, but it's so many of them. The colors in the cards and in the background relate so well. It's hard to believe that.
Oh,
just found it
well,
like that.
that maybe has something to do with the ones that I've chosen to show you today, because there's some that aren't so lively that I didn't put in the exhibition. So there are some that are dull, believe me, that aren't so great.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it was just a question because I watched it. In some cases, the shadow of the card mimics
Yeah.
the shape of the doorway, and there's all these aesthetic things going on.
Yeah, that's my artistry. I made those things happen.
So you're choosing them because you notice these things. That
Yeah.
There's a little bit of red in the card that just picks up the red of the column.
Yeah, because it's the angle you choose. It's the way
That's right.
where I am. I can make it be a different photograph if I don't if I don't know my craft. So yeah, I
That's
do
what
make things.
That's what
I
I
do,
assumed, but I
yeah.
just thought-
Some places are harder than others, that's for sure. But actually, you know, one of the things that I think is a contributing factor is the old part of town. And a lot of these were taken in old Japantown, old Chinatown, and some of the poorer parts of town. And what people would do there is they would buy off-end paints. And so they would have these kind of wild paint colors. This is just a phenomenon that everybody knows about the downtown core, the poor part, where, and definitely the places that I rented from myself, I knew this is what they did. It was like, oh. But anyway, it's colorful there in ways it isn't in the rich part of towns. And that I think you might find in other cities as well. So that's interesting. But yes, I did do some work as an artist. Yes.
I guess I find it interesting how people and their decisions about what they're gonna keep and throw away are kind of personal and almost intimate. And I was just wondering two things. First, did you find that people were ever defensive about having, a large portion of their objects kind of put on display in the card and photographed? And also, when you were doing the continuous garbage project, did you ever feel the need to manipulate the bag so that, I don't know, people couldn't see all your garbage? You know what I mean? Did you ever feel self-conscious about what you were throwing out or something like that? I feel it would be weird for me if something went through all my stuff.
Just between you and I here tonight, there was some condoms showing in a bag one time, and I put it the other way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Yes. I did do some things. Yes, I did. Yeah.
And did you ever find people were defensive about you photographing their carts because they're so kind of see-through in public?
Yeah, there was one fellow who did really get mad at me, and I managed to get the photograph before he kind of started to verbally attack me. I think he was worried that I was working for the police and I was documenting some things that maybe they would have accused him of stealing, or I don't really know. He was pretty wound up and used the photograph anyway. As a photographer, you have some rights to photograph on the street, and I was well within my rights to take the photograph and to use them as an artist. So I just kind of stood my ground and tried to wait till he calmed down. But he was upset at one time. Yeah.
You mentioned with your early work some conceptual relationship to traditional print-based photography and working with the negative and the idea of the negative. I'm wondering if ethically you've seen a shift in your work since kind of the more widespread use of digital photography.
I felt the end of analog photography quite deeply as an artist and as a person. I didn't want that to really happen. I didn't want to let go that relationship to the real that I presumed and I believed myself photography had. And that's what the Garbage Project was sort of about, subliminally. However, it's really difficult to continue on with negatives and with optical printing and all the other kinds of things you need to do to be an artist using that materials. I think you can't even get optical prints unless you are in Berlin, Los Angeles. I think it's really difficult to do in Toronto unless you're doing it at a small scale. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question very well, but I've had to go with the digital, and I've embraced some aspects of it that I think are interesting. The circulation capacity for digital photography is way up. You can reach more people, and it's a give and take, right? Change can be good, change can be bad, but I was very attached to analog. And I find it such a hassle to kind of do it. I may go back to it. I don't know if it will be possible. But, I feel like an old fogey a little bit. I like it so much, but that's how it goes. I love the negatives. I wanted to just show negatives as artwork in the gallery. Yeah.
Two-parter maybe, if I'm not receiving this. Are you using an iPhone or is it?
Oh yeah, sorry. I use a really small point-and-shoot camera. I don't use a professional camera at all on the street. it's intimidating, and people respond to me in a way that I don't like. And I would rather just be kind of casually what I am on the street. So most of the skill and maybe the beauty or the aestheticization is in post-production, because I know how to process that image well. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I work small. As soon as you bring a big camera out, everybody just seizes up, and I don't know. It tends to interfere with the kind of things that I want to do. Did you have a question, Susan?
I did, but it's been
Oh,
lost it.
okay.
So.
I think we're out of questions. So thank you very much. You're welcome, and I'm happy to speak about anything any other time where I'm in the department. You know where to find me. And you're borrowed the mic.